Hello and welcome to episode 9 of For Knit's Sake. We are still on the A to Z of knitting, and I'm going a bit, not political, but my personal opinion is this episode. So this episode was going to be called Hype, How the Media Hyped Up Tom Daley. Now it is called Stop Hating on Tom Daley. There's a lot of dislike for him since he started his business Made with Love, and I'm going to talk about that. But my opinion on Tom Daley is, I love him. Like, he's an amazing athlete. He's been through so much. His dad died of a brain tumour, and yet he's managed to do all these things, and he keeps doing these things. Like, I admire his tenacity so much. Tom Daley is a knitter, a crocheter. He started knitting March 2020 during lockdown, and this was a recommendation from his coach because he didn't know how to sit down, he couldn't relax, and he needed a way to relax and rest his body after diving. And it was his husband, Lance, who said, you should pick up knitting. And because people on film sets often knit like just random squares or something just to like wind them down, because knitting is a craft to wind yourself down. And obviously he became famous for knitting because he's famous already. I think it was a Team GB knitting that made him go viral. So obviously he was knitting this pattern by the pool and someone snapped a photograph and he became viral. And I just want to say first off, like, well done for knitting an advanced colourwork cardigan in public like that. Like with me, I've only done like colourwork a few, like about this big, some skulls, and I was marking off every single stitch. So like, no idea how I managed to have that much concentration and focus in a public place and do an advanced pattern. Very impressive. And he raised awareness on knitting, which is amazing, and crochet, and he's made knitting cool, and I think that's really good. Because in my previous episode, I mentioned that the craft is surviving, knitting is surviving. Knitting fits into the world no matter what the world is like. Knitting's gone through wars, through so many things, through technology advances, industrial advances, poverty. So many things knitting has survived. The craft keeps surviving no matter what. The world fits into knitting just perfectly. It's a part of life, it's a part of the world, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it's going to survive until the end of human race, honestly. It's going to adapt to the world around it. And at the moment, obviously, internet, social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, every social media, that's the way of the world now. And knitting has fit into that. Viral things are a part of the world, and knitting has fitted into that. And I just want to say, for all the dislike of Tom Daley, he did not go into this to annoy knitters. He went into this because he needed some way to relax for his mental health. He went into this and he fell in love with knitting, which you do because, you know, it's knitting. And when he was knitting at the poolside, he wasn't thinking, oh, if I do this, I'm going to become famous and start my own business. He just was picking his project up and knitting by the pool. And he was so zoned into his work, because you do when you knit and you zone into your work. He was so zoned in that he probably didn't even notice someone took a photograph, and then he went on Twitter or wherever, and he noticed he'd become viral. He'd be like, huh, what? I was just knitting. So yeah, the reason Tom Daley's famous for knitting is because he's famous in the first place, and people seem to forget that. I'm not going to quote any Twitter things that I found, but the main reasons are because he's a man, because he's famous. The main reasons are because he's taken that away from small businesses and indie dyers and things like that. But he's an athlete. He's not going to be an athlete forever. He's got a skill. He's started a business from that skill, like everyone wants to. He's got a child to support. He's got to. Athletes retire really young. He's not going to be an athlete forever, and he's setting himself up from a skill that he's learned himself. But it's a skill he's learning advances with himself, like you in your room. You learn on YouTube. Like I've recently learned to knit in the round. So he's setting himself up for life, for his child, for the future of his family, like everyone wants to. And another thing is, like, the fact that he's a man. I watched one video and the lady was like, oh, it's because he's a man. If a woman diver was knitting on the poolside, it wouldn't go famous. And that's an assumption. How do you know that? And it probably would go viral because knitting is amazing, and it's a famous person's knitting. Everyone knows about it. Like, as a knitter, you know famous people that knit, like Patrick Stewart. There's so many famous people that knit, honestly. I'm not going to go into that. But as a knitter, you want to look up famous people that knit, and obviously Tom Daley is one, so I don't know why people don't think that's amazing. I have a lot of opinions about this, and I don't want to come across as annoyed, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 7 pages of notes, and I hope I get to say everything I want to, and I hope I say it properly. I just want to start off by saying, before we go into Tom Daley's knitting, like, he does a lot of things. He is a charity advocate, so his dad died with brain tumour, and he now supports a Brain Tumour Charity. He's raised so much money, and they're actually doing a research now because of the funding he's done for Brain Tumour Charity. And I myself have a brain injury, and I work for Headway Glasgow, and many people there have brain tumours. My friend has died from a brain tumour, and I'm wearing this Twilight Walk top because this is a brain tumour t-shirt. Did the Twilight Walk to raise funds. I raised about £110, I think. That was Twilight Walk in Edinburgh. I can't remember what year. But yeah, when something happens to you traumatic, to your family member, you often go into the charity that helps that thing that has affected you, or your family member, or your friend, which he has done, and a lot of respect for that, because when you support something after something's happened to your family or yourself, you put a lot of light onto you and your personal experiences with that event. You don't just support a charity and not talk about it, because the whole reason you support a charity is because of what's happened to you, which is why I have alphabet brains now, because I have a brain injury. I had it in 2013. I had a couple of years struggling, but then I wanted to raise awareness, which is exactly what he's doing with the Brain Tumour Charity. And I'm supporting the Brain Tumour Charity because my friend, and because of the work I'm in. So yeah, like, charity advocate first of all, which is amazing. It takes a lot of courage to tell your story, which he's done for more than just his dad. He's done for like his coming out experiences, loads of things. So yeah, very good for that. And obviously he's just finished his swimming, cycling, rowing and running 270 miles to raise funds for comic relief, and oh my god. I'm on here now, like, I'm wearing my pyjama bottoms underneath, but I've had a year of being really ill. So before, last year, 2020, yeah, honestly, the years just blend into one at the minute. 2020, I was mad into cycling. My longest journey was 60 miles. I cycled up Michael Bin, which is, there's a word for it in Scotland, I don't know what it is. It's not a mountain, but it's like another word for that. But I would go on crazy journeys, and I would cycle up massive inclines, like ridiculous. I was really, really fit, and I know how much effort it takes to be that amount of fitness, to have your mindset on something. You're in the middle of a massive bike ride up a big hill, and you can't stop. You can't just go home. You got to keep going. And so yeah, for what he's just done, I can't really massive amount of respect for that, honestly, because I know how much it takes to just even cycle. So he's done all the exercise in like 3 or 4 days, which is amazing. So yeah, he's an amazing athlete for that. He's an amazing diver. Like, he's no idea how his body goes into them shapes at all. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not into, like, I don't watch the Olympics, but when I see him dive, I'm like, that is impressive, like, really good, really good. I don't know much about Olympics and stuff like that, but I know he is an impressive athlete. Now for the knitting side. The knitting world was on his side until he started the business. I remember just scrolling through Twitter, and obviously I'm knit, so I follow knitting people, and they were just dissing. He's a man, how dare he? Oh, people are struggling, like, how dare he start? There was so many. I'm not going to, like, screenshot them on here because I think that's a bit rude, but, you know, you can go look into it yourself if you want to. Knitting fits into everyone's life, no matter how poor or rich. That's why it survived through, like, the wars, depression. It survived through so many things, and it fits into every life. Rich, poor, famous. Every aspect of life knitting fits into. And this is just another aspect of the knitting life, knitting world. And when they did like snap that photograph of him, like I say, he probably wasn't aware because he was zoned in. He was just in his happy little bubble, knitting. He wasn't in it to cause frustration for people. But seriously, I don't know why I'm on Twitter still. There's been so many knitting debates. There's been a lace debate. You should block your lace knitting. There's been a toe up, cuff down debate on socks. And now the Tom Daley thing. In one of my previous episodes, I mentioned that I need to delete TikTok so I sleep better. And I have deleted TikTok and I'm sleeping a lot better. So I think I'm going to delete knitting. No, I'm not. I think I'm going to delete Twitter because it's just so miserable. People just hate life on there. There's so many complainers. It was like this when he started his business. You can do threads on Twitter, so that's when someone puts a comment, because you can have limited characters. Someone puts a comment, then they put a comment below, and it's like a big thread. And it's just, it's called doom scrolling. There's even a phrase for it, and it is doom scrolling. And even if you don't follow the person that said the comment or the tweet, you follow someone that liked that, and that comes up on your feed, which isn't good. I have Twitter for alphabet brains, but that I don't go on it that much, so I don't get that. But on my personal one, I go on it all the time, so I think I am going to delete it. Like the sock debate, the lace knit, the whole point of knitting, it's supposed to be happy. It's supposed to be good for your mental health. It's supposed to bring you together as a community, whether that's real life knitting natters or online. It's just really helpful as well. Like, you go to knitting natter and people help you with something. You comment on Reddit, like, I've got this problem, and people help you. It's meant to be a helpful, positive community. And when I was starting this knitting podcast, my boyfriend didn't understand that it would be a thing. So I showed him it, like the YouTube podcast world, and he was like, wow. I'm like, yeah, it's a wholesome part of the internet. And I thought it was until this whole Tom Daley thing came out. There's so many things on Twitter I scroll past and I literally roll my eyes at. And this Tom Daley thing was one of them. Like, just be happy that someone is happy to be knitting. They're raising awareness on knitting as well. Like, and they're making it cool. Which isn't that what you want as a knitter? We're on page 1. Bloody hell. Another thing about Tom Daley raising awareness on knitting is, at the moment especially, the world is miserable. Everyone's miserable. Everyone's fed up of COVID. Him, like, learning to knit was good for him during lockdown, and him continuing to knit and raise awareness on knitting it's brought a little bit of happiness into this whole coronavirus mess. People have learnt to knit because of him. People have learnt to crochet because of him. And I was watching one video where someone was making the Tom Daley inspired hexagon cardigan, the one he made for him and his son, like the matching cardigans, which is so cute, by the way. When I have a baby, definitely going to make us matching clothes. But yeah, the world's miserable. I'm not going to go into coronavirus thing, but the world's miserable, and knitting and crochet is making us happy. And if someone famous knits and crochet, it made us happy until he brought his business out and people started kicking off about it. Page 2. He's got skills. He knows what he's doing. He may have learned only a year and a half ago, but he seems like he's been knitting and crocheting for years. I was watching a Lorraine interview, not on real life, because I don't watch Mon, not awake in the first place, and I don't watch stuff like that. When I was in hospital and Loose Women was on, oh god. But I watched his daily diaries, and then obviously when I was doing this podcast, I did a bit more research into it, and then that's where I found the Lorraine. I don't know how I'm explaining myself. I don't watch Lorraine, alright, but I watched this video of him and Lorraine. And this comes into my episode, 14 Things I Love About Knitting. I mentioned the craft surviving, and it was a way of life. So people, up until like the 70s, I think it was, people were learning to knit in school. And so he was talking to Lorraine about knitting, and he had cast on some stitches for her, so she had something to start with. And he was teaching her how to knit, and he was doing it the way I teach people how to knit. So you've got the knitting, and they either sit next to you or they sit behind you, so they can see your work as you see your work, and that's the best way to teach someone. And that's what he did. So they were sat next to each other, like a bit far apart, and he moved to go like this, and he was showing her, and then she was there, and she could see exactly, so he knows what he's doing, he knows how to teach her, he was using the right words, he was going slow for her, and she picked it up. Like, impressive. I do think it's like riding a bike. If you've knit as a kid, I think it depends how old you are when you start. But yeah, she picked it up and then he put the knitting down and she was still knitting, which I thought was lovely. And that is what he's bringing, the loveliness. He's raising awareness of the loveliness of knitting. And the skill, like obviously the Gucci dress is famous. He recreated that, and like, I'd been knitting for years, and I learnt to crochet last August 21, and I still have no idea how like knitting works. I can't write a pattern. I don't know how the triangle works. I don't know what to do to make a triangle. And in crochet, I don't know what stitches to do to make a shape. I honestly have no idea how it all comes together. But he seems to have picked that up. And that is impressive for a year and a half. Like, I'm really impressed. So yeah, good on you for starting your own business. Yeah, he made that Gucci dress. And I was watching the Daily Diary of it, and he was just like, made this, not sure if it's good, and he just put it on his floor and showed us. And it's like, he's one of us. He's a happy crocheter, a happy knitter, in his own little bubble, and then his little yarn stash was behind him. And it was just like, oh my god, he's one of us. He's a bit messy with his like yarn stash. He makes a project and he's not sure, whereas everyone else is like, that's amazing. Because you know, as a knitter or crocheter, you make something and you think, oh no, that's not very good. But people who don't knit or crochet are like, that's amazing. And that's what I thought when I was watching the video of the Gucci dress. Like, oh my god, how did you make that? How did you put the shapes together, the stitches? Like, I've been knitting for 5 years now, and I honestly have no idea how to make a triangle. I know how to make a triangle if I read a pattern. I know how to make like really complex shapes, but that's if I read a pattern. If someone said to me, make a triangle, and they handed me some wool and some needles, I would have no idea. I have no idea how stitches come together to make shapes. It's the same with crochet, no idea. So for him to pick that up in a year and a half is very impressive. He got skills, yo. So I've got a note here. Moved with love. Obviously being famous helped him with this, but you can't stop him knitting and crocheting because he's famous. I can't believe all the anger from fellow knitters about this. He obviously loves knitting and wants to share that with everyone. In fact, being famous is raising awareness on knitting, and it's making people want to knit. And I think as a knitter, you should respect that. Like, you should think, if I was famous, I would do the same. If you were famous and you picked up knitting, you would do the same thing. You wouldn't stop knitting. I honestly don't understand where it's all come from. If you were famous, you would knit, and then after a while, a year and a half is a long time. You can learn a lot in a year and a half, which he has, and he started his own business. And I think as a knitter, you should just be like, yeah, I'd do the same thing if I was famous. Of course you would. I learnt to knit, and then like 3 months later, I opened a Etsy shop. So a year and a half is a long time. I gave up a net shop because I don't like making things for people. That's another blah. But yeah, a year and a half is a long time to pick up knitting, and he has picked it up really well. Like, he knows how shapes work, like I say, which is very impressive. I still think of myself as like basic-ish knitter. Although I have learnt magic loop recently, which I'm very proud of. It's going to be a long knitting journey for me. I'm going to be learning by the time I'm like an old lady. I'll still be like, oh, I learnt Fair Isle. I'll be like 79 or something. But that's just my brain injury. I'm very slow at learning, and not everything goes in. But with knitting, I have the passion and the tenaciousness to keep going and keep learning. I think of all the celebrities, and I don't really know. I'm not really into celebrities. I don't know any. And the ones I do see, they're all douchebags. Like, Tom Daley just comes across as genuine and nice. He's got a lovely little family. He's trying his best to make a future for them as well. And in his little daily diaries, he's like baking, and he's got his like yarn stash. And he's one of us, like a messy, messy hoarder of yarn. Makes something, not sure about it. He's one of us. It seems pretty normal. And I don't know, I think of all the celebrities to raise awareness on knitting, he's the best one. He's normal, he helps charities, genuinely helps charities, because there's a lot of celebrities that just do it for the likes, for the Instagrams. Even before Instagram, like 2090s, celebrities were doing it just to look good. he does it for genuine reasons, which I love. I think I respect that because of all the things I've been through, my brain injury, and the people I see at work who have brain injuries and things as well, and then my friend. So yeah, I really respect him going into charity for genuine reasons as a celebrity, because celebrities are a bit, like I say, douchebags. I'm not gonna lie, they are. He has the same passion for knitting and crochet as we do, and I think as knitters and crocheters we should. Actually, it's not crocheters that diss him, it's just knitters. There's a thing known as knitting police, and I'm learning now. The more I do this podcast, the more research I do, I'm learning just how awful the knitting police are. Like, leave people alone. Like, just leave them to knit. That's the whole point of knitting. It's supposed to be a happy place. Your happy place. Your happy place where you go. So you're on a bus, on a train, on a plane, in a waiting room, in a park when it's sunny. You take knitting with you. You knit all the time. You knit while watching films. It's supposed to be your go-to calm, relaxing, happy thing. It's not supposed to be something that is It's not something that should be judged by anybody, especially another knitter. No matter your skill level, how long you've been knitting, even if you make things that are bad, like they're holy, who cares, because you've made them. That's the whole point of knitting. It's supposed to be this nice thing. So the knitting police can just F off. And also, like, I know he's got a business, but he didn't go into it for the money. He went into it for his mental health, to rest after diving and things. He went into it and he fell in love with it, because you do as a knitter. You start knitting and you just become addicted, which he has, obviously. But yeah, you start knitting and you become addicted, and it becomes your life. It becomes something that defines you, and it becomes something you want to, like, brag about, tell your friends about, make gifts for your friends, and eventually start a business if you want to. That's another thing. I just have so many feelings about it, and I honestly don't know how to finish this podcast. I don't feel like it's been summarised, and I just feel very annoyed that the knitting world has reacted to his business as they have. Like I said, I'm not going to do any screenshots because that's, like, a bit mean, and I'm not mean. I don't want to become the knitting police. Hopefully this video hasn't made me the knitting police. I'm just telling the knitting world just to be nice, because it's supposed to be nice. I'm just going through my big notebook of notes to see if I've missed anything. Alright, another note that doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to say it anyway. The photo of him knitting went viral because he's famous. Everyone's kicking off, like, he went viral from one photograph. Of course he did. He's famous and he's knitting. That would be the same with a woman. And the fact that he's a man has nothing to do with it. It's because he's famous and he's knitting. But I made a note here. A photo of him knitting in public that went viral. You're not going to take a photo of a random stranger and that become viral. In my head, when I was writing it down, that seemed very clever. Reading it to you guys now, it's like, that's really dumb. But it's true. It's like, the photo went famous because he's famous. If your mum was knitting at the poolside, you wouldn't snap a photograph and she wouldn't become viral. I don't know. It just seems so silly, and it's not nice on anybody. He's just a happy little guy who's knitting. And, like, aren't we all? Okay, right, I think that's it. Amazing athlete, diver, and knitter. Advocate, all-round great guy. And I was going to do classic Tom Daley and knit while doing this podcast, but, like, I had so much to say and I wanted to say it all, and I had my notepad. You're thinking that's a book near me? No, it's a notepad. It's in a series of unfortunate events notepad, so it's got, like, pictures from the books and little quotes. So I was on the phone with my mum and I was telling her about this episode. I was like, I've got an episode. I'm not sure, like, I'm a bit nervous to do it because it's not political, but it's like a personal opinion. And she was like, oh, I'm interested by that. And I was like, ever heard of Tom Daley? And she's like, oh, yeah, he knits, doesn't he? And that's the response we want as knitters, as people going through a struggle, as every person who knits should have that response, honestly. I think to knit in the first place is a great skill, and it's impressive to be a knitter. Like, I'm very proud that I'm a knitter, and I'm proud of other people that knit, especially those who are new to knitting, because it might be too complicated for you to do. So you might learn to knit, but you might not be able to do it properly, so you stop. So to keep going and making advanced patterns in public, which I still can't get over. I'm in my room like hunched over. I've done one stitch of the blue. That's me when I'm doing a colour work. When it's like, so yeah. Knitting is a great skill, and the response we should get when we find out he knits and they started doing business because of that, to support his family and because he's got the passion for it, should be that. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Let me know in the comments below what you think. I'm not sure how this video is going to go down. I've tried to be open and everything about knitting previously, but I feel this needs to be said, because obviously he started his business November last year, and that's when all the fuss was kicking off, and I was just scrolling through, and I was rolling my eyes. I couldn't believe it. So I've had these thoughts since November, and they're still happening on Twitter. And then with the knitting police, with the block your lace, toe up, cuff down, it's all in my head. So now I've vented. Okay. I was going to buy myself a kit, but I'm on a strict yarn buying New Year's resolution. I don't think that's going to last very long. The more I'm doing research into my podcast episodes, the more I'm needing to buy things for it. Thankfully, I have an episode coming up, which is for International Women's Day, and I'm working on some socks that are the Votes for Women sash colours, and thankfully I have them for my yarn advent. That's good yarn for that episode. But I feel that the more I learn and the more research I do, the more I'm going to have to buy yarn. But I haven't struggled before this, and I'm actually really enjoying using my yarn stash. And I might treat myself to a Tom Daley knit. I might treat myself for my birthday in August for one. Okay, thank you for watching. If you're new here, please like and subscribe to see which is the next one, International Women's Day, where I'm going to be talking about knitting spies. That's all I'm going to say. I've researched a lot about knitting in the past couple of weeks. No, days. I've spent days like just researching about knitting, and I've learned so much. Like, knitting is amazing. I have so much respect for knitting now than I did before I started this podcast. I'm learning about knitting as I go with this podcast, and I'm getting to talk to fellow knitters more, and I'm just loving the whole experience. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you're new here, subscribe to see that next episode, and if you're not new here, thank you again for watching and going on with this journey with me, and I hope this video has been okay to watch. Like I say, I don't often express my personal opinions on anything, and I complain about Twitter, but I don't post any negative stuff in there. I don't post any political views. I don't post any personal opinions. It's just I follow a lot of like comics and funny stuff. So basically my Twitter account is just like retweets of funny comics or just a funny joke about my life with a funny gif. I don't have any political views online, personal opinions online. I try to keep it separate. But I do feel like this had to be said, and I hope I've done a good job of saying it. Let me know in the comments below your opinions, if you want, or you can just watch and not comment and, let it sink in. Alright, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next Monday. Bye.